All right, welcome back to the Cross Connection, everybody. The January 6th committee has raised the stakes, formally issuing a subpoena to Donald Trump and instructing him to appear for a deposition on November 14th, 6 days after the midterm election. Now, Trump has been complaining about the January 6th committee since its inception, so many are skeptical that this guy is actually going to comply with the subpoena. But just yesterday, one of his closest allies, Steve Bannon, was sentenced to 4 months in prison for guess what? Yep, refusing to comply with the subpoena from the January 6th committee. Joining me now to get into this is Glenn Kirshner, a former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst, and I'd argue an MSNBC viewer favorite. Glenn, so happy to have you with me. My first question, I'm sure you've been asked this 1,000 times, is there any chance Trump will actually show up? He loves to be center of attention, and he'd have all eyes on him if he showed up to this committee.
Tiffany, he will not show up voluntarily. I suspect he will quickly try to move this into the courts and fight it and run out the clock. It's what Donald Trump does, and he has been quite successful at it. But we actually have a pretty important precedent, right? Back in 1974, in April, the Nixon tapes were subpoenaed. And just 4 months later, in July of 1974, the Supreme Court ruled that give over the tape. So what do we have there? We have 4 months that subpoena worked its way through the system. What do we have now? Well, the J6 committee's term is up, I believe, on January 3rd. So we have less than 3 months. If this subpoena is to work its way through the courts, and, if we get to a point where Donald Trump is ordered to sit for this interview, the courts would have to break their own record from 1974 and do it in under 3 months rather than the 4 months it took for them to do it back in 1974 with the Nixon tapes. Am I optimistic any of that will happen, Tiffany? Not especially.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, Glenn, and you said he's going to run out the clock, and you make a really good point. January 3rd, 2023, should the Republicans take over Congress, all of January 6th goes away. The committee hearings, all of that goes away. So we will have to see. With the Steve Bannon incident, I mean, I don't know if Trump will meet the same fate. Will that influence Donald Trump in any way? I mean, he clearly thinks he's above the law.
Yeah, it might. The Steve Bannon incident, as you put it, it sickens me, quite frankly. I have to take a deep breath before talking about it because, Steve Bannon is a wealthy, white, influential, connected male. He's a criminal associate of a former president. And Steve Bannon decided to commit the crime of contempt of Congress. Why? To hide from Congress and, by extension, the American people, evidence of the crimes of Donald Trump. Thereafter, he was referred for prosecution. He was indicted by a grand jury. He was tried by federal prosecutors, and he was convicted by a trial jury. And then Trump-appointed Judge Carl Nichols decided to cut him an enormous break and say, you know what, I'll give you only 4 months in prison, and I'm not even going to make you report to the Bureau of Prisons to serve your time. You get to remain free while your appeal runs its course. And Tiffany, that could take years. I am embarrassed for the criminal justice system, and I am saddened and sickened that that is the result for Steve Bannon.
Yeah, and it just punctuates the point that you brought out that there are two different justice systems, applied for the privilege. I was reading about this law firm that Donald Trump hired, and they sound, I'm curious to know what you know about them. It's the Dillon Law Group. They already have represented a lot of folks who are multiple witnesses who appeared before the committee. Harmeet Dillon, this is the firm's managing partner. She's the National Republican Committee chairwoman from California, but she's helmed a lot of wild legislation, or litigation rather, related to other conservative causes, like the policies that shut down schools, churches, and businesses during COVID. Does this law firm have any chance? Are they going to be more of a talking point or actual people who are, officers of the court trying to litigate something?
Let's hope they take their responsibilities as officers of the court seriously. But, look at Donald Trump's track record. Every lawyer he touches seems to get into some kind of trouble, from being disbarred or sanctioned to, being hauled in before the Department of Justice to be questioned about why you signed false certifications that Donald Trump no longer had any evidence of crime down at Mar-a-Lago, any of the classified documents that he stole from the federal government, when that was false. So, let's see if he has any better luck with this new firm. But the thing is, Tiffany, he doesn't have any good litigative positions. All he has is delay. And hopefully the courts are wising up and are no longer going to let him play the delay game. I'm encouraged by some things we've seen out of the 11th Circuit with prompt resolutions of some of Trump's ridiculous claims. And of course, we had the Supreme Court refusing to even take for review anything concerning the Mar-a-Lago documents case. So maybe, just maybe, the courts are wising up to his game.